Okay. All right. So I'm going to pull up the text here. Share screen. Where is it? Mail, not Finder, not Rabbinic. No. And here it is. Okay. All right. So, oh, wait. I have to. There we go. All right. So last time we concluded right here on 4b, where so we were talking about when does one recite, when do you begin reciting or mentioning God's power to bring rain on the festival, on Sukkot, or actually it's Shmini Atzeret? And the answer is we go back to the very beginning mission that we had, where Rabbi Yehuda said that the way it works is the first davener, the one who leads the Shacharit service, does not mention rain, but the Musaf leader does mention rain. That's in the special prayer, Tfilat Geshem, that we say on Shmini Atzeret. So then the question, well, what about in the diaspora? Because we've got 2 festival days. So what does that mean? And how does this work? So basically, the simplest explanation is that it all has to do with how long it takes the moon to rotate around the Earth, which is not, it's 29 and a half days plus something a little bit more, according to rabbinic counting. And so therefore, in the way that in ancient Israel, they used to declare the new month, even though very early on they had a calendar. It's really remarkable how they did the math. But early in I think it was as early as the 300s, they actually had a calendar that they knew exactly when the holidays were going to fall every year. And there's a lot of changes in the cycle. It gets very complicated because you can't have certain holidays fall on Shabbat. So you have to manipulate this already kind of complex calendar to fit the religious requirements. And you also have to make sure that Passover, you have to manipulate that lunar calendar cycle to make it fit with the solar cycle, because Pesach always has to be in the spring. So every 2 to 3 years, we're adding a whole new month. And it's a 19-year cycle. And some years you have to change the calendar a little bit because, Yom Kippur, Hoshana Rabbah cannot fall on Shabbat, nor can Yom Kippur fall on Friday.
Well, so, what is Hoshana Rabbah?
Hoshana Rabbah is the 7th day of Sukkot.
Okay.
Because that day we've got we have to do carry the lulav and etrog, and we do the willow ceremony. So that can't fall on Shabbat. So they have to make these little manipulations. Okay. So it's pretty impressive mathematics that they did.
I think a lot of that was inherited from earlier Mesopotamian calendar.
Yes, I think that, right. Look, the are living in
astronomy was very impressive.
Right.
Centuries earlier.
But the only thing that was new was certainly the whole concern about the Sabbath. Pesach, right. So yeah, they were basing it, I'm sure, on earlier mathematics, but I mean, just
fundamental
it's pretty impressive what they were able to do. But it didn't matter because they followed this tradition. The tradition is that and this was true as long as there was a Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. Even when they had the fixed calendar, you had to the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem had to declare the new month, which meant somebody had to see the new moon. Then they'd bring evidence of it, because again, these guys knew exactly where the moon should be, based on their knowledge of astronomy. They had to bring evidence, and then the court in Jerusalem would declare, okay, today's the new month. And they would do all of the prayers and all of the I guess in temple times, they would do the offerings that were appropriate. That's great if you live in Jerusalem and you can get the word out in a couple of hours. But what if you live in the northern part of Israel? What if you live in Syria? You're not going to know. you're not going to know within a reasonable time, not so much because of the day of Rosh Hashanah, but if you don't get the word out, let's say it's the month of Nisan, it could take more than 2 weeks to figure out when the actual day of Pesach is. So the custom developed that in the farther reaches, you would observe 2 days for these holidays, because so since the month is 29 and a half days, if take month number 1 and you declare that to be the new month, so 29 and a half days, which would mean sometime on that 30th day from day 1 of month 1, is going to be the next the next month is going to start. But since it's 29 and a half, the next 29 and a half days after that might be the 30. Am I doing this right? I always get 30. Yes, it might be the 31st day might be the new month, right? Because the last day of the month would be the 30th day, and then the new month would start on the 31st day. So because you have this 29 and a half day, and there's this leeway between days, it was determined that it's easy, you just, and in a perfect year, we're not talking about a year in which there's a lot of manipulations because of the holidays. A perfect year, it's going to be a 29 month followed by a 30-day month, 29-day month followed by a 30-day month. If you're living far away, you know that 30th month, it could be there's got to be a little bit of leeway. So it could be the new month could start on the 30th day on some time, or it could start on the 31st day. And so the custom developed that, again, you're talking in a perfect year where it's every other month would be a 30-day month. The custom developed in the diaspora that you would always observe that extra month as a 2-day Rosh Chodesh. And therefore, of course, the holiday was always going to be Passover and Sukkot, Shavuot, would be a 2-day holiday, because it was either one day or the other day. There were no other possibilities. It was either one or the other, since the months are 29 and a half days long. So that's the origin of it. And the Reform movement, in their decision to go, and a lot of people in the conservative movement feel this way too. We know what the calendar is today. Why are we doing this? Why do we have these 2-day holidays in the diaspora when you know exactly what day the holiday is now? You don't have to guess. And the answer is, and the Talmud discusses it, it's minhag avotenu biyadenu. It is a minhag, it's a custom that our ancestors followed, and we're going to keep to it. So when the Reform movement made that change, they were being very rational, because it wasn't really necessary anymore. The only error that they made was on Rosh Hashanah, because Rosh Hashanah is not, so let me go back. So a 2-day Rosh Chodesh is actually the 30th day of the previous month and the first day of the new month. So the only error in saying that Rosh Hashanah is a 1-day Rosh Hashanah, and this is true in Israel as well, where they also only observe 1 day of a holiday, is that Rosh Hashanah is not the 30th day of Elul and the first day of Tishrei. Rosh Hashanah is the first and the second day of Tishrei. And that has to do with a different concern, because if they determine that the first day of the month of Tishrei was in the afternoon, which on Rosh Chodesh, it wasn't such a big deal, but on Rosh Hashanah, you had all of these special ceremonies you had to do. And so therefore, you couldn't get it all in. And so the practice became to always observe day number 1 and day number 2. And that's why in Israel to this day, even though they only observe 1 day of Passover, 1 day of Sukkot, they observe Rosh Hashanah is day 1 and day 2 of the month of Tishrei. So anyway, that's the explanation as to why we have these 2-day months, because basically the lunar month is 29 and a half days. Okay, so now that comes to this conclusion where we had, well, what if I'm in the diaspora? We have 2 festivals, we're living in Babylonia, we have 2 festival days. When do we start mentioning rain? If we mention it on that first day, on the Shmini Atzeret, meaning 8 days after the 15th of Tishrei, in our counting method, it could actually be the 7th day of Sukkot, because again, we're observing 2 days. So it could be that the actual day of Sukkot may have started on what we're counting as the 16th day of Tishrei. So therefore, what do we do? Because now we're starting the counting of, we're mentioning God's power to bring rain on what's actually, objectively, is the 7th day of Sukkot. So Rav, who is, Rav and Shmuel are transition figures between the Mishnah and the Gemara. They're that very first generation. They were taught by the last of the Tanaim, and they're the first generation, at least in Babylonia, of Talmud scholars, of Gemara teachers. Amoraim is their title. So Rav says, well, the solution is this. What you do is you begin mentioning rain in the Musaf service on the 8th day, which is our day, 8th day of our counting. And then because we might be wrong, because it might be day number 7, we'll just stop and we'll continue as if maybe it's the 7th day, maybe it's the 8th day. We just won't mention rain anymore until we get to the next day at Musaf, which is the 9th day of our observance, 2nd day of Shemini Atzeret. Then we'll mention it on the 2nd day. So meaning that in the evening of what we would call Simchat Torah today, the evening of Simchat Torah and the morning of Simchat Torah, we don't mention Mashiv HaRuach U'Merida Gashem. And we wait until Musaf, just because we don't know which day is the actual day. So Shmuel's problem, and Shmuel and Rav are contemporaries. Shmuel says, wait a minute, the problem I got with that is, and it says, go tell Abba. If you look at the background notes, Rav's name is Abba Richta, but he was known as Rav, obviously meaning the rabbi, the great scholar of his day. Go tell Abba, which is his name, this objection. You've started your Shmini Atzeret holiday in the diaspora by mentioning, at Musaf, by mentioning rain, Mashiv HaRuach U'Merida Gashem. And now you're going to go back and say, okay, now we're going to consider the next 24 hours as if it's regular time. That's ridiculous. We don't go backwards. So what you should do is, you should actually consider that day that you started, day number 8, according to our counting, as the entire day should be considered Shmini Atzeret. And once you start mentioning rain on Shmini Atzeret, at Musaf, then at the Mincha service, you also mention Mashiv HaRuach U'Merida Gashem. But the next day, we act as if, today's Shmini Atzeret again, which means that in the evening and in the morning prayers on Simchat Torah, we don't mention rain, because we're like reenacting the previous day. We're doing a do-over, complete do-over. And then when we get to Musaf on Simchat Torah, the 9th day, which could actually be the real Shmini Atzeret, we go back to, we mention Mashiv HaRuach. So basically they would be doing Tfilat HaGeshem for 2 days. Rava, who is a later Talmudic rabbi, he's the 4th generation. He's the 4th generation, says, wait a minute, no. Once you start, you don't stop. And in fact, you can see here, that's the halakha. Once you start on that day, you continue. Once you start on Shmini Atzeret, whether it's the actual Shmini Atzeret or it's our, diaspora early, we're a little bit early in the diaspora because we're not sure, we no longer stop. You just keep on going. You keep mentioning rain once you've hit that Musaf on the 8th day, and you don't go backwards. You don't pretend the next day is the 8th day. We just continue forward. And Rav Sheshet, who's a later a generation or 2 later than Rava, agrees. That's exactly what the rule is. One no longer stops. And you can see that the halakha is even in the diaspora, where 2 days of each festival are observed, one begins to insert the expression, he makes the wind blow and the rain fall. That's Mashiv HaRuach U'Merida Gashem. in the additional prayers of the 8th day of assembly, Shemini Atzeret, from which point one continues to mention rain continuously until the end of the rainy season. That's from the Shulchan Aruch, the 16th century code of law. And then we find out actually that Rav, who was up here telling us, each day you should treat it as if it's a new, you only mention it at the Musaf service, even he retracted. As Rav Hananel said, that Rav said one counts 21 days from Rosh Hashanah, just as one counts 10 days from Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippur. And after the 21st day, one starts to mention rain. And once one has started, he no longer stops. The Gemara concludes, and the halacha is accordance with the opinion that once one has started to mention rain, he no longer stops. So you have here, and this is not all that common, where the Gemara gives us the halacha. A lot of times we're just given opinions, and then it's for later generations to determine from the discussion what the halacha is. And sometimes you can kind of tell where they're leaning, but it's not all that common for them to end the discussion, say, this is the halacha. The only difference is between Rav's retraction and Rava and Rav Sheshet is that instead of giving us the whole, whether it's Shemini Atzeret or not Shemini Atzeret, day 1 or day 2 of Shemini Atzeret, he says 21 days. He gives us a number by which we count. And once that 21, you hit that day 21, which is going to be Shemini Atzeret, certainly if you were observing a one-day holiday, that's when we begin the rain. So that's the end of our discussion on this first Mishnah. And now, so any questions about that? I sometimes get very confused trying to explain the days, but the main thing to remember is it's 29 and a half days is a month, and that causes these issues in the diaspora. If the runner from the Sanhedrin can't get to you within a couple of week period, so you're not going to know exactly.
So if I understand what you were saying correctly, the fundamental thing is whether you consider the second day to be a do-over,
right,
a complete do-over, or you simply proceed from the first day and do not stop mentioning.
Right. So and
the reasons are the 29 and a half. Behind all this are the 29 and a half days.
Right.
And how that doesn't align with an integral number of days in the month.
Right. So because that's where the confusion is, because since it's in the middle, it's that middle of that 30th day, and you don't know where that's going to fall every month. Yeah. So that's where the confusion lies. And so again, if you're observing 2 days, since it's 29 and a half, there's only 2 possibilities. It's either the day 30 or 31, or so is going to be the next start. So that's where the 2-day custom develops. Yeah. But again, in the modern world, there's a lot of, at least in the conservative movement as well, obviously in the reform, there's been a lot of questions. So, why are we doing this? And part of that is, of course, motivated not by math, but by the fact that you can, in a lot of conservative congregations, you can barely get a minyan during the week for Pesach or Shmini Atzeret on the first day, let alone, the second day, to get people to take off of work. So there's been a movement. Let's shoot for 1 day, and we'll be more successful. But so far at Sinai, all the years I've been here, we've been able to get those 2-day holidays in. So we're still going on the Minhag Avotenu B'Yadenu plan, but obviously places where that's impossible, then you have to make changes. Okay, so now we're at our new Mishnah. And the new Mishnah is Ad Matai Shoalin et Geshamim. We've kind of had an indication of this because they brought it up in the Talmud so far. The question is, until when do you ask for rain? Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ad She'avor HaPesach. Rabbi Meir Omer, Ad She'etzei Nisan, shene'emar v'yored lechem geshem moreh umalkosh barishon. Oh, we had this discussion already because we had the whole issue of what does it mean Ya'avor HaPesach? Okay, so the question is, when do we stop? When do we until when do we ask for rain? And Rabbi Yehuda's answer was until Pesach is over. At least that's one way of translating it. We saw that there were different ways. Maybe it's until the guy is finished davening on the first day of Pesach. And so we had different solutions. Rabbi Meir says, his opinion is, you continue to ask for rain through the month of Nisan, because there's a verse, Vayored lachem geshem, moreh umalkosh barishon, and that's from the book of Joel. And the verse in English, the translation is, and God causes to come down for you the rain, the first rain and the last rain in the first month. Since the verse states that it rains in Nisan, the first month, this indicates that the entire month is considered part of the rainy season. And it says here in the note, no, where are the notes here? And so it says here that the commentaries discuss the nature of this proof. One explanation is that the verse is not cited by Rabbi Meir, but by an unattributed author of the Mishnah, and it is interpreted by each Tana in accordance with his respective line of reasoning. So that basically Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir are using this verse as their proof, but they're interpreting it in different ways. Although the verse speaks of the final rain falling in the month of Nisan, it doesn't clearly state whether it's the middle or the end of the month. Yeah, because that verse is not so clear. God causes rain to come down, the first and the last rain in the first month. I mean, it could be anywhere in the first month. It doesn't have to be at the end. So that's the Mishnah. But it's a little confusing. You may have noticed there's the first rain and the last rain, the Yoreh and the Malkosh, right? The Yoreh, Moreh umalkosh. Now we already learned that is two names for the Yoreh is the name for the early month, for the early rain. Malkosh is a name for the latter rain. And we've learned so far that Yoreh comes in the fall and Malkosh comes in the spring. So this is a little bit confusing, this verse. What does it mean that Yoreh and Malkosh both come in the month of Nisan? That's not what we've learned so far. So this is going to be a concern for the Gemara. And as I mentioned, this is well, I'll get to that in a second once we get through this first passage. So about the whole, the way the tradition is passed on according to these rabbis. So here we have Rav Nachman said to Rabbi Yitzchak, is the first rain in Nisan? Here, this is the question. Yoreh b'Nisan, because we've learned that more Yoreh is in Tishrei, right? Or no, it's in Mar Cheshvan, sorry. It's in Mar Cheshvan. That was the whole discussion of the first part of the Gemara. Yoreh b'Mar Cheshvan hu. Ditnan, Yoreh b'Mar Cheshvan u'Malkosh b'Nisan. The first rain's in Mar Cheshvan, and the last rain is in Nisan. And there's a note here that says that in Israel, there's only a small amount of rain that falls in May, in this Nisan period. So it usually ends by around April. So that's an interesting piece of information. Okay, so we get now an explanation of why the verse from Yoel comes in. So Rabbi Yitzchak said to Rav Nachman that Rabbi Yochanan, who was Rabbi Yitzchak's teacher, said as follows: this verse fulfilled in the days of the prophet Joel, son of Pituel, that's the prophet, in a year concerning which it is written, that which the palmer worm has left, the locust has eaten, and that which the locust has left, the cankerworm has eaten. This is a bad year. And that which the cankerworm has left, the caterpillar has eaten, when no crops remained. So it was a bad year, right? Everything was being eaten that whole fall season. In that year, the month of Adar, which is the month before Nisan, ended and still no rain had fallen. The rain of the first rainy season fell for them on the first of Nisan. So the context for that verse in Joel about Yoreh and Malkosh falling in Nisan was a specific situation, a very bad year where there was a famine and no rain, a drought, and the bugs ate all the crops. And then Amar lahem Navi Yisrael, Tzu'u v'zir'u, Amru lo mishi yesh lo kav chitim o kabim se'orin yochlenu v'yichyeh o yizorenu v'yamut. Now this is an interesting, I'm sure this is an issue for people all over the world in places that depend on agriculture and there are terrible droughts. So the prophet says to them, go out and sow, right? After this first rain fell in Nisan. So no rain has come. And then the very first rain comes in Nisan. And they don't have any food. All they've got is the stuff that they were planning on planting, their seed corn, right? And they said to him, okay, so what are we supposed to do? We have very little material left to seed for the next season, but we're starving. Do we eat that, or do we sow it, but then we're going to die because there's no food? This is, a terrible choice that I'm sure a lot of people in these areas of drought that depend on subsistence farming have to deal with all the time. Given Steinsaltz adds here, given the improbability of the crop's growth under these circumstances, it appears wasteful to plant them rather than consume that which remains. But the prophet said to them, nevertheless, go out and sow, because he knows what's coming. A miracle occurs, naseh lahem nes, v'nitgaleh lahem ma shebaktalin u'ma shebechorei nimalim. So the miracle occurred. They discovered wheat and barley seeds that were hidden in the walls and that were concealed in ant holes. So they found this stuff. They found extra food. They could spare what they were going to use for seed. And then Yatsu v'zaru sheni ushlishi urevi'i. They went out and sowed on the second, third, and fourth day. Let me turn this off. This is irritating me. How do I turn it off?
Rabbi.
Yeah.
This
I thought so.
Rabbi Yohanan is the rabbi who fought with Resh Lakish.
Wait, I'm sorry. The Rabbi. Yes. Rabbi Yochanan is the rabbi who has the famous story about his argument with Resh Lakish. Of course, they were very good friends. They were brother-in-laws. Resh Lakish is married to Rabbi Yochanan's sister, and they were what's called bar plugta. They were study partners. But then they have this tragic falling out. Yes, it's the same guy. So they go and they sow on the second, third, and fourth days of Nisan, and the rain of the second rainy season fell for them on the 5th of Nisan. Hikrivu omer bashisha asar b'Nisan, and the crops grew so quickly that they were able to sacrifice the omer offering in its proper time on the 16th of Nisan. Right, that's the the counting of the omer period. We call the whole period between the end of, from the second day of Pesach to Shavuot, we call the whole period the Omer period, because any of day during that time, you could make this offering of Omer, the new grain crop. But the truth is that they offered it on the second day of Pesach. They offered it right away. So that's what it's referring to. So when it says Hikrivu Omer Bashisha Asar, they made the Omer offering on the 16th of Nisan, because they had so much. In 5 days, the whole crop grew. It's fantastic. Consequently, grain that normally grows in 6 months grew in 11 days. And consequently, the omer that is generally sacrificed from grain that grows in 6 months was sacrificed that year from grain that grew in 11 days. It was a miracle. And then now we get this great, what do I want to say, interpretation of verses of the book of this passage in Psalms. That, this is what we sing. This is Shir HaMalot that we sing before Birkat Hamazon on Shabbat or festivals. You know, the Shir Amalo B'Shuv Adonai Yet Shiva Tziyonayinu Kecholmin. And the verse in there is Hazorim Bedima Berina Yiktsoru Haloch Yilech Uvacho Nosech Meshech Hazara. That was referring to, according to this interpretation, that's what this psalm is talking about. They who sow in tears will reap with songs of joy. Though he goes on his way weeping, who bears the measure of seed, he shall come home with joy, bearing his sheaves. So this is talking about that period of time. What's the meaning of the expression, though he goes on his way weeping, who bears the measure of seed? So Rabbi Yehuda says, an ox, when it plowed at that time, it went on its way weeping and lamenting its labor. And yet, upon its return through the same furrow, it was able to eat the young shoots of crops that had already sprouted from the furrow. And this is the meaning of the phrase, he shall come home with songs of joy. And I think one of the notes explains here, I thought somewhere, maybe not, I got it from somewhere else, that it was Rashi, I guess, that what I mean, the reason why you say, well, why is he talking about an ox? Well, how do you know that he's talking about an ox? It's because the verse says, they who sow in tears shall reap with songs of joy. I want to make sure I got this right. Yeah, that's the first part. The person is sowing in tears, but he'll reap with joy because he's sowing, and by the time he comes back, oh my goodness, the stuff is growing already. Then it says the same thing again. Now, of course, in biblical Hebrew, this is parallelism. But though he goes on his way weeping, who bears the measure of seed, he'll come home with joy, bearing his sheaves. But of course, Rabbi Yehuda is taking this literally, that you wouldn't say, there's no parallelism here. It's that talking about two different people, right? That you don't say the same thing twice. It doesn't mean it doesn't make sense to say the same thing twice. So the first verse must be talking about the human, and the second verse is talking about some other creature, being, who is doing the same thing, weeping and then being able to come back with joy. There must be the ox. What I like about this, as I said in the notes that I sent out, I think is really nice that Rabbi Yehuda and the Gemara are so concerned with the animals, that they too have to be, we're concerned about their suffering as well. They're plowing without any food. And but in this case, they had food on their way home. And then the conclusion here is, Mai nosei alumotav. What does it mean to bear sheaves? Roy Chisda said, and some say it was taught in a Baraita, V'amri la b'matnita tana, kana zeret shibolet zartayim. The stalk of that crop was one span. The distance between a span is a zeret is, I guess, the same as a hand's breadth. The distance between the thumb and the little finger, while the ear itself was 2 spans. It was so big. It was such a special year of growth that all the stalks that came up, all the grain that came up was really, really big, and gave people a lot of food to eat.
I don't think I will ever again say those who sow in tears shall reap in joy without thinking of this.
That's good. Exactly right. So now we know it's about, the people and the oxen who will get.
There was much taking with the ox.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're on a new section. Oh, well, it's not. It's actually not. It's new, and yet this is what I pointed out in the notes. This is not uncommon, the way the Gemara works. We call it stream of consciousness, but it's also sometimes it's like what do I want to say? They get into. They mentioned in this case Rav Nachman's asking a question of Rabbi Yitzchak, who then shares a response from Rabbi Yitzchak's teacher, Rabbi Yochanan. There are obviously a lot of teachings that were taught in the academy or through generations of this in this pattern. Rav Nachman asking Rabbi Yitzchak, who then shared Rabbi Yochanan's teaching. And it could reflect, as we'll see by the end, that it could reflect actual, this is how it happened, and they would have meals together, and they would learn Torah at these meals. But it's once the Gemara has started on this path, this structure, they just keep throwing out everything else that those who are putting this together know about Rav Nachman asking Rabbi Yitzchak, who gave a teaching of Rabbi Yochanan, whether they're on the topic or not. But we've moved because of that formula, which shows up. We now go through the formula, and we focus on the formula, not so much on the content of what the topic of this Gemara is, which is, and well, in this case, it's about asking, when do we stop asking for rain? So, but I also think that there's something about how teaching was done and how oral traditions were kept. If you're trying to memorize this stuff, if you can memorize the formula and then just put it all together, it's a lot easier than trying to remember exactly where this next teaching, which is coming up, fits within content. I think it's easier if, okay, we've got this whole formula. Rav Nachman as Rav Yitzchak, he taught Rabbi Yochanan, and then you just memorize all of those. So I think this may also be an indication of how oral teachings were transmitted. Okay, it's certainly true with the Mishnah. The Mishnah very often has mnemonic devices to memorize the Mishnayot. But anyway, in this case, here's the next teaching. Rav Nachman said to Rav Yitzchak, "Mai dichtiv ki kara Adonai lara'a v'gam ba el haaret sheva shanim, behanach sheva shanim mai achul." So we have this passage from 2 Kings that said, and it says, "For the Lord has called upon a famine, and it shall also come upon the land 7 years." So, good question. What did they eat during those 7 years if there was a famine here? Let's see the notes. In those 7 years, what did they eat? So here he's just explaining that, there are other instances of famine in the Bible, obviously the time of Joseph. Rav Nachman singled out the famine that afflicted the people in the days of Yehoram, the king of Israel, for his question with regard to what people ate during the period of scarcity. One explanation is that the divine decree concerning the famine was carried out in its full severity and for its entire intended duration, in accordance with the verse, "For the Lord has called upon a famine, and it shall also come upon the land 7 years." Okay, so this was a really bad famine. So what did they eat? So Rabbi Yitzchak, teaching in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, gives us the rundown. In the first year, they ate that which was in their houses. In the second year, they ate that which was in their fields. In the third year, they ate the meat of their remaining kosher animals. In the fourth year, they ate the meat of their remaining non-kosher animals. In the fifth year, they ate the meat of repugnant creatures and creeping animals, right, insects and stuff. In the seventh year, they ate the flesh of their sons and their daughters. And in the seventh year, they ate their own flesh to fulfill that which is stated here in the verse from Isaiah, "Ish basar zro'o yochelu." Clearly, this is an attempt to explain what does this verse mean? Ish basar zro'o yochelu, that each person should eat the flesh of his own arm. Well, actually, you know what? They did that. They actually ate their own bodies because they were so hungry. I don't know what more to make of it, except that it's an attempt to explain what these verses, no pun intended, but fleshing out these verses. Okay, now again, same structure. And here's the verse. The verse in this case is from Hosea. It is sacred in your midst, and I will not enter the city. The verse is puzzling. Because it is sacred in your midst, why will God not enter the city? Like, if it's sacred, if there's sanctity in your midst, why, meaning Jerusalem, if there's sanctity there, why wouldn't God enter the city? So Amar Le, so this is Rabbi Yitzhak answering Rav Nachman with the teaching of Rabbi Yochanan. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Lo avo berushalayim shel mala ad she'avo lerushalayim shel mata. The Holy One, blessed be He, said, I shall not enter Jerusalem above in heaven until I enter Jerusalem on earth below at the time of the redemption when it will be sacred in your midst. Here, this is a reference to clearly to the idea, I think we even have a note here, of that there's that this world has a parallel in the heavenly realm. And the world above, so there's a Jerusalem above and there's a Jerusalem below. There's a holy temple above, there's a holy temple below. And as this is really important in Kabbalistic thought, where what we do in this world impacts on what goes up in what happens in the world above. And so what he seems to be saying is that Rabbi Yochanan seems to be teaching that God is going to, the Jewish people are in dire straits, they're in diaspora, until the Jerusalem below is sanctified and holy and God can enter that realm. God's going to restrain God's self from entering the upper Jerusalem. Let's see, what does the note say here? One interpretation of the concept of Jerusalem above is that Jerusalem and the temple signify the refined matters of the intellect as corresponding to the earthly Eretz Yisrael. There are spiritual levels located in their lofty world. Wait, what is it? What? Well, in any case, Rashba is suggesting is obviously taking a non-mystical approach by suggesting that when it says that Jerusalem above, this is really an issue of the intellect, the spiritual level, and there's the earthly Eretz Yisrael, and then there's our I guess spiritual abilities in which are higher, not part of this, not the I want to say not the earthly, not the materialistic world. With regard to the interpretation of the verse itself, some say that the verse should be read as an expression of wonder. Since your midst shall be sacred, shall I not enter the city? Okay, so that's the Maharsha's commentary on the Talmud. They further explain that the verse is meant as a source of comfort to the Jewish people in exile, for it is almost as if the Almighty One is also in exile, and God will not enter Jerusalem up high until the Jews are redeemed on earth. Okay. So that's what?
This remind me the Bar Torah from yesterday about the Jacob's dream.
Well, from this week's Torah portion, you mean of the dream?
Yeah, about the Jacob's dream.
I mean, I guess you could see. I mean, certainly it speaks of a realm up above. I mean that with the angels going up and coming down, and but I mean that might be, maybe that's the source. I don't know. Maybe that's the source of that concept. But certainly later on in Jewish thought, there is this idea. Well, it's here in the Talmud that there's a parallel realm in the heavens to this earthly realm. The Iyun Yaakov, I'm not really sure, I don't know who that is, but obviously it's a commentator on the Talmud. But in any case, the answer, right, is that to explain this verse, which says that when there's sanctity in the earthly realm, until there's, I guess they're reading it this way, until there's sanctity in your earthly realm, I will restrain myself from entering the city of Jerusalem, the heavenly city of Jerusalem. That's how I think Rabbi Yochanan is explaining it. And I mentioned in the notes that I sent out that the translation of this verse is very different if you look in the new JPS. They translated they take the word ba'ir, because it's so confusing, because it doesn't seem to make sense on the face of it, they amend the term here, be'ir, which means in the city, as ba'er. They take out the yud and they say, or maybe it can even be left in there, but they change the vowels. But ba'ar in Hebrew is to burn. And so they translated it as something like, when I am in your midst, when the Holy One is in your midst, my fury shall not go forth. So they're translating ba'er as fury, fire, fiery, anger. But that's, if you looked in the new JPS for the translation, they wouldn't have the same one, because they're also confused by this comment, and their solution is, instead of coming up with a interpretation as Rabbi Yochanan did, they changed the word ba'ir to make it more logical.
So that emendation is given as a footnote, as a proposed emendation in BHS. So so the idea of changing it to ba'er is not original with JPS.
Oh no, right.
That may be original in English, but
right, exactly. They're and I don't know. Yeah, I don't know enough about who makes the emendations in the BHS.
Sometimes you can tell that it came from some version there. There's absolutely no clue. So,
but I mean, there are books written that solely about those Mazoras. So
right, because they've got sometimes it comes because they have, they're looking at early translations like the Septuagint. Or the
usually they say if it comes from something like that. Targum,
right, exactly.
Manuscript.
So I just wanted to point out, if you looked at the new JPS translation, it would be like, wait, that's not even close. So how did they come up with it? All right. Oh, and here's they continue about this notion of Jerusalem above. Is there such a place as a Jerusalem above? In Dichtiv Yerushalayim habnuya ki ir shechubra la yachdav. In Psalm 122, there's a verse that says Jerusalem, the rebuilt Jerusalem, or here Jerusalem built up, it's like a city that is all attached together, or unified together. And so here they understand as a city unified, as the terms unified indicates that there must be two cities of Jerusalem. There's one above and there's one below, and they're bound together. And so what happens below impacts above. Here we go. Next one. Same formula. Amar le Rabbi Nachman le Rabbi Yitzchak, Mai dichtiv uve'achat yiva'aru v'yechaslu musar chavalim eitz hu. What's the meaning of that which is written? And with one they are brutish and foolish. The teaching of their vanity is a stock. Rabbi Yitzchak said to Rabbi Nachman that Rabbi Yochanan said, there is one transgression that causes the wicked to burn in Gehenna. That's right, like a place like hell. What's the transgression? Idol worship. This can be proven by a verbal analogy. It is written here, the teaching of their vanity is a stock. Musar havalim eitzu. And it's written over there in Jeremiah, Hevel hema maaseh ta'tuim. They are vanity, a work of delusion. So again, we saw this earlier. You have this where they connect words. So they've got the word hevel in a verse in Jeremiah that very close to each other, right? This is verse 15, this is verse 8. So in one, he uses the term hevel to describe a work of delusion, an idol. And here, the teaching of their vanity is a stock, as 8 seam are like or sticks. So the teaching of their vanity is of a stick, which I guess in this case meaning something they're idol practice of idol worship, and let's see. Okay. And unless he means because eitz is something that burns up. Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm not sure how they translated it. Well, the Hebrew here is uvachat yiva'aru. Here's that verse, that verb again. Bet ayin reish means burn. And I guess you could translate it as for one reason they are burned, and they are foolish for believing in the teaching of this vain, empty teaching. It's like a stick. Well, if their stick burns, where do you burn? You burn in Gehenna. And here you have this, again, the term hevel connects to idols. So then Rahman asks a question, wait a minute. And this was referring to Israel, I think, in Jeremiah. I forget the context now, but it refers to people of Israel. So Rav Nachman brings a good complaint. Wait a minute. My dechtiv kishtaim raot asa ami tartain hu dehavu. He says, what's the meaning in this passage in Jeremiah? My people have committed two evils. Were there only two evils they performed? Weren't there 24 violations listed in the book of Ezekiel in which they broke 24 rules? I.e. pardon. Okay. Rav Yitzhak said to Rav Nachman, Rav Yitzhak said to Rav Nachman that Rabbi Yochanan said as follows: they violated one transgression that is equivalent to two, and that is idol worship. Avodah zarah. Dechtiv ki shtayim ra'ot asa ami oti azvu mikor mayim chayim lachsov lahem be'orot nishbarim. My people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me. That's number one, fountain of living waters, to hew for themselves cisterns, broken cisterns. And it is written about the Jewish people, for pass over the isles of Kittim and see, and send to Kedar and observe carefully, and see if there has been such a thing. Has a nation exchanged its gods, although they are no gods? But my people has exchanged its glory for that which does not profit. So idol worship is the worst thing you can do. That's the big sin. And that's what you suffer most for. Tana.
So it said that there's one transgression you can burn in a Gemara for. Does that mean that you can do anything else and not go to hell? Like you can?
Yeah, that's a good question. Right. I think that I don't know. That's a good question. I suppose we could speculate that maybe that's the one transgression you can't really atone for, because that's the big one, right? That's the essential one, not to believe in God, or not to, or it's not even to not believe in God. It's to exchange God for a false God. That's the big sin according to Rabbi Yochanan. And so maybe that's the one. The other things, even if you end up in Gehenna, there's one understanding of Gehenna and the after death period is that for most people, at least this is Maimonides' approach, is that for most people, if you weren't considered a tzaddik, then the period after death is a period of cleansing, a purging, and that after the period of purging, the person ends up in the heavenly realm, and or is ready for the world to come, for their judgment. And so for us Jews, being to be sent down to Gehenna is not necessarily an eternal punishment like it is for, like the Catholics teach that, you burn in hell forever. It's really a period of purging. I mean, I don't know if I'd want to go through it, but it seems to be time limited according to Maimonides. For most people, unless you're really, really a horrible, evil human being. So maybe that's it. Maybe this is the one thing that you can't, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that you can't really atone for.
So what about the conversos? Doesn't look good for them.
Right. So, that is a very interesting question, because this was a huge, huge debate in the 18th century among rabbis as to whether conversos are damned for eternity or whether not. And so that was a big question. And a whole host of issues come out of it. You know, that's according to some people, that's the basis of Kol Nidre, is where did Kol Nidre start, or where did it become prominent in the Yom Kippur, pre-Yom Kippur ritual, is among the conversos, because they were saying, you know, our oaths are not really oaths. Our beliefs are not really beliefs, because they're saying we're, you know, outwardly we're professing Christianity, but that's not what we really believe. But yes, it was an issue. It was a big issue, a big debate in the 18th century, whether to accept conversos back into the community. So you can imagine if you were came out of a converso stock, you're doubly suffered, right? Among the Christians, they don't really trust you because you're a converso and they never really know if you believe the truth. And inside you're torn because you want to go back to your Judaism. And then among some Jews, they didn't accept you either because you were tainted. So that was really very painful for a lot of them, the conversos families. In fact, that is there's a suggestion that in the early modern period, a lot of the ideas that broke with traditional views came from conversos, because they were bringing, they come from they've been learning, right? They've been growing up knowing secretly they're Jews, but they're learning, right? Publicly, they're learning what all the other Christians are learning. And on the other end, so I mentioned there's this debate among certain rabbis whether we should accept conversos back or not, because maybe they were guilty of idol worship. But then on the other hand, you have conversos who are coming back to Judaism and saying, why do we have to listen to these rabbis? These rabbis don't understand, they're not interpreting the rules correctly, because they've been impacted by their cultural learnings. So it's a really interesting period, the post, the diaspora of converso Jews, and what they bring to some of the unconventional thinking they bring back to Judaism when they come back. So that's a really, really very good question. Okay, well, let's go on, because just about 12 o'clock, and I want to get to the beautiful, beautiful ending of this passage, this section. Let's skip a little to the next one. Rav Nachman said to Rabbi Yitzchak, once again, the same formula. Ve'amar le Rav Nachman le Rabbi Yitzchak, mai dichti vayihika asher zakein Shmuel. It came to pass when Samuel was old. And the question is, wait a minute, he's only 52 years old when he died. He wasn't that old. Why did they call him, he was Zakein? So the question is, as the master said in a Baraita that deals with divine punishment of karet, one who dies at the age of 52 years is not considered to have suffered the premature death of karet, as this is the age of death of Samuel of Ramah. So they use this age number, 52, as saying you really didn't, you haven't died before your time. What is not considered to have suffered the premature death, even though at the same time it is not an old person's death. So it's 52 years is kind of maybe a midpoint, a middle age. So how did this come about? Why did he die at 52, and why is he called Zakein? So then we get this long story from Rabbi Yochanan that basically while he was 52, he's not a spring chicken, but he looked really, really old when he died. So God made him to look old because God was in a bind. On the one hand, he said, I regret that, Shmuel said, I regret that God said, sorry. God said, I regret that I made Saul king, right? Samuel was the one who anointed Saul to be king. And Samuel is the one who gets the word from God that he has to anoint David to replace Saul. So God says, I regret that I made Saul king. But Samuel says before God, wait a minute, Master of the universe, you've considered me the equivalent of Moses and Aaron. That's a psalm that we sing on Friday night. Moses and Aaron among his priests, Samuel among those who call upon his name. So I'm equal to Moses and Aaron. Just as with regard to Moses and Aaron, their handiwork was not annulled in their lifetimes, so too let my handiwork not be annulled in my lifetime. I anointed Saul. Please don't annul his reign, because it'll make me look bad, right? That I messed up. So now God's in a bind. What should I do? Shall Saul die now? If Samuel won't allow it, as he's petitioned that Saul should not die. So I can't kill off King Saul just yet. But because if Samuel is still alive, it'll look like he screwed up. He picked the wrong guy. But shall Samuel die young? He's only 52 years old. Then people will murmur about him and wonder what transgression Samuel, the prophet, committed that caused his early demise. Shall neither Saul nor Samuel die? Because the time of David's reign has already arrived, and one kingdom does not overlap with another. So one of them's got to go. And subtract from the allotted time. Okay, the point is, if he kills off Saul so David's reign can start, it'll look like Samuel failed in some way. If he kills off Samuel, Samuel's too young to die. It'll look like Samuel committed a transgression. So what does he do? God comes up with a solution. I'll spring old age upon him. He'll look like he's 90 years old. And then when he dies, and then we have some more explanation here. When he dies, everybody will say it's normal. Oh, he was an old guy. They didn't know he was 52. He looked like he was 90 years old. But Saul, and then he'll die, and then Saul will die afterwards. So it won't look poorly on Samuel.
So this is Midrash on the...
Yes. This is all Midrash. This is...
I read it yesterday, so thank you.
It also...
they're trying to figure this out. But I think what's behind the Midrash is what's really interesting. This question, Umi midchi gavra mikame gavra, can one person be set aside for another man? That is, can Saul's demise happen at an early age because David needs to start because of all these factors? So for the sake of David's reign, which has already begun in terms of the divine decree, and not wanting Samuel to be embarrassed for his ministry work, can Samuel be killed early, put to death earlier than he should have, just so that this kind of timeline can work out okay? And the answer is yes. Again, here's a teaching from Rabbi Yochanan. This time it's Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani who's teaching it. Therefore I've hewn by the prophets, I have slain them by the words of my mouth. Now that you should know the context here is false prophets, but Rabbi Yochanan is understanding even true prophets. It is not stated by their deeds, but by the words of my mouth. God sometimes ends the life of an individual simply by virtue of God's decree. Now, this is really, I think this is looking at the world and trying to make sense of, the great question of all religions. Why do some people, good people, righteous people, die seeming before their time? And the Gemara's answer here is, well, because God's scheme of the world, the way God's planned things out, certain things have to begin at a certain time. And in this case, Samuel, again, he could have had Samuel live a longer life, but then it would have been, perhaps it would have besmirched Samuel's legacy. And so in this case, God ended a life to protect that life, but also to make sure that the timeline keeps going forward, the decree of how things should work. David's time is beginning now, and Samuel, I can't be, worry about Samuel's concern over his legacy, but I am sensitive to it, so I'll come up with a solution. I just think it's a really interesting attempt to make sense of why the things that bother the rabbis, that bother the rest of us in this world. Why it seems like somebody dies when they shouldn't have to die. It seems wrong, but the rabbis here are suggesting, well, God has God's own plan.
This seems, in another way, somewhat unfair to Samuel.
Yes, yeah.
Samuel did not want there to be a king in Israel, and God directed him.
Yeah. Right. Yes. It is not easy to be a prophet. Jeremiah makes that very clear. I really didn't want this job, but God doesn't really concern God's self with, the prophet's individual needs. God has a plan and needs messengers, and it's not easy being a prophet. And sometimes, you're absolutely right. God tells Samuel, it's okay, go ahead with the king, with declaring him king, and then God determines that this guy's not up for the job. But in this case, if I could make a contemporary from the sublime to the ridiculous, when Rick Hahn had to explain to the world why they were bringing Tony La Russa as manager, when he had already told us that they were going after a recently winning World Series manager to bring the White Sox, this young team, into to make them contenders for the World Series. And then Jerry Reinsdorf, his boss, as a favor to his dear friend Tony La Russa, brings Tony La Russa back out of retirement after 10 years to manage players, which he probably has no business managing because he doesn't understand guys in their 20s. Rick Hahn has to go in front of the crowd and say, yeah, this is something that was determined to be really the best thing. When people are saying, Rick, that's exactly the opposite of what you said you were going to do. But he's stuck, right? He's got to defend his boss, and he has to take the hits for it. So, so these things happen. In any case, here's the last piece, which I just love. This story, here we get a real life example. So we've been talking about Rav Nachman and Rav Yitzhak, and here we get the realia behind it. They're sitting and having a meal, and they're studying Torah. And this is where we get the halacha. So Rav Nachman says to him, would you teach some Torah? And Rav Yitzhak, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, says, we're not going to talk right now because you don't talk during a meal because it's not healthy. The food could get stuck in your esophagus. So after they finish eating, then Rav Yitzhak begins to teach Torah. And this is a really interesting teaching. Well, the first one's interesting. The second one is just weird. First one is basically that Yaakov never dies. Well, what does that mean? How can you say that? We know it says in the Torah, they embalmed him and buried him. And Rabbi Yitzhak explains, no, what I mean is that Yaakov, like in a spiritual sense, in a figurative sense, he'll never die because the Jewish people will never die. And of course, we are Israel, right? So we live on as Israel, and just as Israel, Jacob will never die because the people of Israel will not die. The next one is about anybody who says Rachav will immediately have a seminal emission. And then I just think it's so funny that Rav Nachman tests that. I like the way he tests that theory, and he goes, nothing happened. And he goes, well, what I meant was, actually, if you lived at that time, she was so beautiful that if you would looked at her and called out to her, you would have been, overcome with arousal. And then we have this last one. And this, I have to say, I shared this teaching at Yaakov ben Abraham's bris in honor of his parents. That's our grandson. So they're taking leave. Rav Nachman says, would you give me a blessing? And Rav Yitzhak says, I'll give you a parable. To what is this matter comparable? It's comparable to one who was walking through a desert. He's tired, he's hungry, he's thirsty, and he finds a tree whose fruits are sweet. It's an oasis. And he sees the tree, the fruits are sweet, and the shade is pleasant, and there's a stream of water below it. And he was able to satiate himself. And when he wished to leave, he said to the tree, the traveler said to the tree, what shall I bless you with, O tree? You've got everything, right? You've got your fruits. I can't bless you to have beautiful fruits. You've got sweet fruit, shade. You've got beautiful shade. If I bless you that a stream of water should flow beneath you, well, you have that already. What shall I bless you with? I'll bless you that all of your saplings will, which they plant from you, should be just like you. And so the conclusion is, what should I bless you with, Rav Nachman? If I bless you with Torah, well, you're a Torah scholar. If I bless you with wealth, well, you have wealth. If I bless you with children, you have children. So my blessing to you is, may it be God's will that your offspring shall be like you. And I just love that. That's such a beautiful teaching and a wonderful thing to share with any parent, that your kids should be just like you. That's the most beautiful blessing. So that's a nice, I like it when the Talmud ends with a powerful lesson like that, that we can learn from. So same thing to all of you, that either those of you who have kids, or if you haven't had kids yet, that when you have them and when you have them, they should be exactly like, they should be like you. They should be and that's the highest blessing. All right, I think that's it for today. I'll keep sending out the notes. Everybody have a good day.
Have a good day, everyone.
All right, take care.
Thank you.
And again, if you have any questions, just send them to me in emails and I'll answer them during the week.
My grandmother told my dad, may you have a son just like you, but I don't think she meant it as a blessing.
Okay, that sometimes I guess it could be a little bit of a dig, but all right, take care.
Have a great day.
Bye.